Hello, and welcome back to Ebon Whisper. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoyed chilling tales that speak in the Ebon Whisper, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1, I moved to California because I wanted to escape. What I was trying to escape from, I could never fully explain. Maybe it was my hometown in Georgia. Maybe it was the people there, the narrow roads, the endless trees, or the feeling that everyone knew everything about me. Maybe I was running from memories I did not want to face. Or perhaps I was simply running from myself. At the time, I did not care about the reason. I only knew that I needed distance. California seemed like the perfect answer. It was everything Georgia was not. It had beaches, palm trees, crowded streets, bright lights, and people who did not care where I came from. I imagined that once I reached the West Coast, I could become someone new. I have lived here for the last 3 years. At first, everything felt strange. The traffic was worse than I expected. The rent was almost impossible to afford, and the dry heat felt different from the thick southern summers I had known all my life. Still, I slowly began to love the place. I loved the graffiti covering old buildings and concrete walls. I loved watching street performers play guitars or dance for crowds who passed without slowing down. I loved hearing several languages spoken on the same block. I even grew to enjoy the weed, which is something the younger version of me back in Georgia probably would have pretended to hate. But more than anything else, I loved the ocean. I had grown up surrounded by woods, small towns, and long roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The first time I stood in front of the Pacific Ocean, I felt as if the whole world had suddenly opened. The beach became my sanctuary. Every evening, after work or whenever I had time, I walked along the shoreline. Sometimes I wore shoes, but most of the time, I carried them in one hand and let my bare feet sink into the wet sand. I listened to the waves crashing, watched white foam spread across the shore, and allowed my thoughts to wander. I thought about the life I had left behind. I thought about the person I had become. Those walks were where I finally began to feel at peace. For the first time, I thought I had found a place where I truly belonged. Now I know that the beach will also be the place where I die. Death is coming for me. It may already be here. I can feel it moving through my body with every passing second, growing stronger as the sun rises higher. There is nothing I can do to stop it. And with each passing hour, I regret coming to California more than I ever believed possible. Everything began last night. The day had been completely ordinary. I finished my shift at work, punched out, and went to the gym. I did a short workout, nothing serious, and then stopped at Chipotle for dinner. I remember sitting in my car afterward, eating while scrolling through my phone and thinking about nothing important. By the time I reached the beach, the sun had begun to set. The air was cool, but not cold. There had been a heat wave that week, and the temperature during the day had reached around 95 degrees. The sand had been hot enough to burn bare feet earlier, but by evening it felt comfortable. I removed my shoes and began my usual walk. The wind moved through my hair. The sand shifted beneath my toes. The waves rolled toward me and then pulled back into the darkening ocean. I thought about Georgia. I remembered summer nights filled with insects and distant thunder. I remembered my old bedroom, the sound of rain against the windows, and the narrow road leading past my childhood home. Then I compared those memories to the life I had built in California. I wondered which version of me was real, the person I had been in Georgia, or the person I had become here. I was so lost in thought that I barely noticed the sun dropping beneath the horizon. The bright orange sky became purple, then dark blue. People began packing their towels and folding their umbrellas. Families carried sleepy children toward the parking lot. Couples left hand in hand. Joggers turned back toward the road. The shore slowly became empty. I did not notice. All I cared about was moving forward. One foot in front of the other. Step, 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 step. Then came the crack. A sharp pain exploded through my right heel. I screamed and pulled my foot from the sand. The sudden movement nearly made me fall. I balanced on one leg while holding my injured foot in both hands. Blood was already running from a small puncture wound in my heel. The pain burned, but the skin around it felt strangely cold, not cool from the evening air. Cold, the kind of cold you feel when touching metal in the middle of winter. I looked down at the sand, expecting to see broken glass. The crack had sounded like a bottle breaking, and people often left trash on the beach. I imagined I had stepped on a piece of beer bottle or something sharp that had washed ashore. That was the easiest explanation. A thin object stuck out from the sand. It looked metallic at first. Moonlight reflected from its surface, making it shine. A small drop of my blood clung to its pointed end before falling onto the sand. I should have left it alone. I should have wrapped my foot, called for help, and gone directly to the hospital. Instead, I crouched down. I held my injured foot with one hand and carefully picked up the object with the other. The moment it touched my palm, I nearly dropped it. It was freezing. Not refrigerator cold. Not even freezer cold. It felt so cold that it seemed to burn my skin. I brought it closer to my face and finally realized it was not metal. It was nearly transparent. What I had mistaken for a silver surface was only moonlight reflecting through it. It was a crystal of ice, a long, narrow piece of ice, sharp enough to pierce my heel. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. It made no sense. The day had been extremely hot. Even after sunset, the temperature had remained warm. The sand should have melted a small piece of ice within seconds. Yet the crystal had remained buried beneath the surface, as if it had been waiting there. My blood covered its tip, but the red did not run down the sides. It seemed trapped inside, forming thin lines through the clear ice. That was when I noticed my foot had begun to go numb. The numbness started at the puncture and spread through my heel. It moved toward my toes and then up around my ankle. I tried to drop the crystal, but my fingers did not open immediately. It felt as if the ice had attached itself to my skin. Then it began to melt. At least, that was what I thought was happening. It grew smaller in my palm. The sharp edges softened, and the entire crystal seemed to collapse inward. But no water appeared. My hand remained completely dry. The ice was not melting over my skin. It was disappearing into it. That is the only way I can describe what I saw. The crystal became thinner and smaller until it looked like a clear thread resting across my palm. Then, even that vanished. It seemed to pass directly into my pores. When it was gone, there was no water, no stain, and no mark left behind. At the same moment, the pain in my heel disappeared. The numbness began to fade as well. I looked at my foot and saw that the puncture wound had closed. There was no open cut and no fresh blood. In its place were several dark blue lines spreading out from the spot where the crystal had entered. They looked like tiny veins. I pressed my thumb against the skin. It did not hurt. I slowly placed my foot on the ground. There was still no pain, only cold. A deep, powerful cold surrounded my entire foot. It felt as though the bones inside had been frozen solid. I did not know what to think. Part of me understood that something was terribly wrong. Another part kept searching for a normal explanation. Maybe the object had contained a chemical. Maybe I had been poisoned. Maybe my mind was reacting badly to the shock. I decided not to go to the hospital. I told myself I would wait until morning and see how I felt. That decision may have killed me. I began walking back toward my car. At first, I tried not to limp. I did not want anyone to notice me, although there were almost no people left on the beach. With every step, the cold spread farther. It moved through my ankle and into my lower leg. Thin lines of freezing pain seemed to branch through my muscles. It felt like frost crawling beneath my skin, forming a web around my bones. Then, I felt it in my other foot. It was only a weak sensation at first, almost like an echo. My left foot had never touched the crystal, but its toes began to grow numb. I kept walking. I kept telling myself it was panic. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were shaking. The drive home took 20 minutes, but I remember very little of it. I felt detached from my body, as if I were sitting somewhere behind my own eyes and watching someone else drive. My hands remained on the steering wheel. My eyes stayed on the road. My mind contained only one clear thought. I needed warmth. I turned the heater to its highest setting. Hot air blasted against my face and hands, but it did nothing. I shivered harder. My teeth struck together so violently that my jaw began to hurt. Every breath seemed to create a faint white cloud in front of my mouth. I told myself that was impossible. The inside of the car was becoming hot. Sweat should have been running down my face. Instead, my skin felt stiff and cold. Then the voices began. At first, they sounded like radio interference. A soft whisper moved through my head, too low for me to understand. I turned off the car radio, but the sound remained. The whispers grew louder. They were not coming through my ears. They were inside my mind. Many voices spoke at the same time. Some were deep and rough. Others were high and thin. Some sounded like children. Some sounded like elderly people. Men and women spoke over one another in a language I had never heard. It sounded both ancient and impossible, like words from a civilization that had not yet been born. I shook my head, hoping to clear the sound. It did not help. I turned the radio back on and increased the volume. Music filled the car, but the voices rose above it. I tried speaking aloud. I tried thinking of simple things. My name, my address, the route home. The voices drowned out everything. They spoke faster and faster until the pressure inside my skull made my eyes ache. I nearly missed the entrance to my apartment complex. When I finally parked, the voices became quieter. They did not stop. They moved farther away, as though they had stepped into another room and continued whispering behind a wall. I climbed out of the car. My entire body trembled. By then, I was sweating heavily. My shirt stuck to my back, and drops ran down my forehead. Yet I still felt frozen inside. When I raised my key toward the lock, I noticed my fingernails. They had turned blue, not slightly blue from being cold, They were dark, almost purple, like the nails of a dead body. I stared at them for several seconds before forcing myself inside. I went directly to the bathroom and turned on the shower. I set the water as hot as it would go. Steam filled the room. The mirror fogged until my reflection disappeared. I stepped beneath the water, expecting pain from the heat. Instead, the water felt cold. It was like standing beneath a waterfall in the middle of winter. I touched the stream with my hand to check the temperature. The skin on my fingers turned red almost immediately. The water was hot enough to burn me, but my body could not feel the heat. I remained there for nearly an hour. Steam covered the walls. The bathroom became difficult to breathe in. Eventually, the hot water began to run out. The moment the temperature dropped, the voices noticed. They began shouting inside my head. The strange language returned, louder than before. The sound was filled with fear and anger. Some voices screamed, others cried. Several seemed to be giving orders. My nose started running. Before I could wipe it, the moisture around my nostrils began to freeze. My teeth chattered so hard that I bit my tongue. I tasted blood, but even the blood felt cold. I stepped from the shower and wrapped myself in towels. Then, I pulled on every warm item of clothing I owned. Nothing helped. I turned on the oven and opened the door. I know that was dangerous. I know I could have started a fire or filled the apartment with gas. At that moment, I did not care. I wrapped myself in a thick blanket and sat on the kitchen floor in front of the open oven. I pulled my knees to my chest and leaned as close to the heat as I could. The metal racks glowed beneath the light. The floor became warm. My clothes grew damp with sweat. Still, I felt as though I were lying naked on a giant block of ice. The oven did not warm me, but it did quiet the voices. The hotter the space around me became, the farther they retreated. Their screams lowered to whispers. I could still feel them scratching at the walls of my mind. That is exactly what it felt like. As if thousands of fingernails were dragging across the inside of my skull, searching for a way through. I spent the night in front of the oven. I did not sleep. I listened. At first, the voices were impossible to understand. They spoke in overlapping sounds with no clear beginning or end. Then, little by little, certain words became recognizable. Frozen, heat, flames, ocean, death. They repeated those words again and again. Sometimes the voices sounded terrified. Sometimes they sounded angry. Other times they spoke with a sadness so deep that it made me want to cry. I began to think they were not one group. They were individuals, dozens of them, hundreds, perhaps thousands. They were all trapped somewhere inside me. Or maybe I was trapped with them. The moisture dripping from my nose froze before it reached my lips. Even beneath the heat of the oven, tiny pieces of ice formed across my face. I started crying. The tears rolled down my cheeks and froze halfway. When they finally dropped, they struck the hot kitchen tile with a small metallic sound before melting. Ting, ting, ting. All I wanted was to feel warm. I wanted sunlight, fire, boiling water. Anything, the voices continued whispering. I tried to understand what they wanted, but most of the words remained hidden beneath that impossible language. Somewhere near sunrise, I closed my eyes. I swear it was only for 2 seconds. I did not fall asleep. At least, I do not think I did. One moment, I was sitting on my kitchen floor in front of the open oven. The next moment, I was back on the beach. I stood in the exact place where I had found the crystal. I was completely naked. My clothes were gone. The blanket was gone. There was no car, no oven, and no apartment. I was sweating heavily. I was also colder than I had ever been. Drops rolled down my chest, stomach, and legs. When they fell from my body, they froze in the air. They struck the sand as tiny pieces of ice. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon. Golden light spread across the ocean. Under any other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. I stared at it, unable to move. Then I heard the sand shifting beneath my feet. I looked down. The frozen drops of sweat were moving. Each one had transformed into a sharp, jagged crystal. They twisted like small living creatures and began digging into the sand. They buried themselves one by one. The sight made me understand what I had stepped on. The crystal had not washed ashore. It had not fallen from the sky. Someone had left it there. Someone like me. I looked toward the beach and saw people arriving in the distance. Morning runners moved along the shore. Families carried umbrellas, towels, folding chairs, and coolers. Children ran ahead of their parents, excited to reach the water. A man walking a dog noticed me and slowed down. I began to cry again. The tears froze against my face. I cried because I knew what was coming. The voices had finally told me enough. They had all been where I was now. They had all tried to fight it. They had all failed. I was the new host, the first case of what was about to happen to California. The temperature rose as the sun climbed. With every increase in heat, the voices grew louder. They screamed inside my skull. They warned me that I could not stop it. They told me they had once believed they could stop it too. The cold continued spreading through my body. It reached my stomach, my lungs, my heart, my brain. Every breath left my mouth as thick fog. People began to stare. Some laughed, probably assuming I was drunk or performing some strange prank. Others covered the eyes of their children. A few pulled out their phones and began recording. Then snow started falling from my ears. Small white flakes drifted over my shoulders. They gathered on my skin, which had turned a bright, unnatural blue. The snowfall became heavier. It surrounded me even though the sky above was completely clear. The California morning was already hot, but frost spread across the sand around my feet. I was becoming my own blizzard. People stopped laughing. Several began backing away. Others came closer. They called out to me. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Someone call an ambulance. Their voices sounded far away. The voices in my head were much louder. They told me to sleep. My heart began to slow. Each beat became softer than the one before it. A faint warmth appeared in my chest. It was the first warmth I had felt since the crystal entered my heel. It was weak, but it felt wonderful. I wanted more of it. The voices promised that sleep would bring warmth. They promised that if I stopped fighting, the pain would disappear. My knees gave way. I lay down in the pile of snow forming around me. The frozen ground should have felt painful, but instead it felt soft, comforting, like a bed. People ran toward me. They were only a few feet away, yet they seemed miles from where I lay. I tried to lift my head. I wanted to warn them. I wanted to tell them not to step into the snow. I wanted to tell them that the crystals beneath the sand were waiting. But my lips would not move. My tongue had frozen inside my mouth. The voices were no longer warning me. They were not angry. They were not afraid. They were mourning. They mourned for me. They mourned for the people approaching. They mourned for every person who would touch the snow, every child who would play in it, and every curious stranger who would pick up one of the beautiful crystals left behind. A woman reached the edge of the frozen sand. She stared at me with horror. Then she took one more step. I tried to scream. Her bare foot came down in the snow. There was a small cracking sound, and the voices inside my head began to welcome her. Story 2. I do not remember how I got here. That is the first thing I know for certain. Everything else feels blurred, as if I am standing inside a dream that is already fading while I am still trapped in it. The light is too white. The air has no smell. Voices rise and fall around me, but they sound far away, as though they are traveling through deep water before reaching my ears. People dressed in white move quickly in every direction. Some are walking alone, others are being guided in small groups. A few stand completely still, staring at nothing with empty expressions. No one seems to know where they are going, but somehow everyone keeps moving. There are no walls that I can clearly see. There is no ceiling either. The place stretches into a pale distance, filled with mist and light. It feels endless, but at the same time crowded. Every few seconds, someone passes close enough that their shoulder should touch mine. But I feel nothing. I look down at my feet. They are moving, but I cannot feel the ground beneath them. There is something white below me, soft and shifting like clouds, yet it supports my weight. I try stamping one foot, hoping to feel something solid. Nothing, no pressure, no sound. It is as if I am only pretending to walk. For a moment, I wonder whether I even have a body. I raise my hands and look at them. They appear normal, though slightly faded around the edges. I close my fingers into fists. Again, I feel nothing. No skin stretching. No nails pressing into my palms. Panic begins to rise inside me. At least I think it is panic. My mind knows I should be afraid, but my chest does not tighten. My heartbeat does not race. There is no sweat on my face. I know the feeling of fear, but my body is no longer helping me experience it. Ahead of me, a man stands on a raised platform. He wears a long white robe and holds a heavy book open in his hands. He calls out names, one after another. When a name is called, someone steps forward. Some people go willingly. Others hesitate. A woman begins crying when her name is spoken. She reaches toward an old man beside her, but two people in white guide her away. The old man calls after her, though I cannot understand his words. Another name is announced. A young boy walks forward alone. I push through the crowd toward the man on the platform. I want to get out of here, I say. The man looks down at me with mild annoyance, as if I have interrupted him during something important. Whatever your issue is, go and tell him, he says. He points across the open space. At first, I cannot see who he means. Then the crowd shifts, and I notice another man sitting behind a large wooden desk. The desk is covered with books. There are dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, stacked in uneven piles. Some are thick and ancient, with dark leather covers. Others are thin and new. A few are open, their pages turning gently even though there is no wind. People stand in a line before the desk. One by one, they approach the seated man and ask questions. He listens, checks one of the books, gives a short answer, and sends them away. Some leave calmly. Some argue. Some collapse. I stand at the end of the line, though I do not remember deciding to join it. The line moves slowly. As I wait, I try to remember the last thing that happened before I came here. I remember my bedroom. That feels real. I remember lying under a thick blanket. The room was dark, except for the small lamp on my wife's side of the bed. She had fallen asleep while reading, and the book rested open against her chest. I remember reaching over and taking it from her hands. I placed it on the table. I remember looking at the clock. It was late. Our daughter had been sick that day. Nothing serious, only a fever. She had called me into her room twice because she could not sleep. The second time, I sat on the edge of her bed and told her a story about a rabbit who traveled to the moon. She had laughed at the wrong parts. I remember kissing her forehead. I remember telling her I would see her in the morning. After that, I returned to bed. That is all. No accident, no pain, no hospital. Nothing that could explain this place. The person ahead of me leaves the desk, shaking his head and whispering to himself. It is my turn. I step forward. The man behind the desk does not look up. I need to get out of here, I tell him. Okay, he says. He turns slightly and calls to someone standing nearby. Take him to the stairs. A thin man in white steps forward. All right, he says. Come with me. He begins walking away. I do not follow. Wait, the guide stops. I look back at the man behind the desk. Where do these stairs lead? The man finally raises his eyes. They will take you to your destination. He says it as though I should already understand. What kind of destination? He places his pen down carefully. Then he leans back in his chair and folds his hands over his stomach. What is your name? Roger. He studies me for a moment. Then he reaches for one of the books beside him. It is not particularly large, but when he opens it, the pages seem to continue far deeper than the book should allow. He runs one finger down a page. Roger, he repeats. His expression changes. Not much, only enough to make me uncomfortable. Roger, you have passed away. For a moment, I do not react. The words are too ridiculous to understand. Then I laugh. It comes out wrong. There is no breath behind it, no vibration in my throat. It sounds like the memory of laughter rather than the real thing. What rubbish, I say. I remember being tucked into my bed. This is only a dream. That is only how it feels to you, he replies. This is reality. No, the word comes out quickly, too quickly. I do not remember dying. He says nothing. How is that possible? I ask. How could I die and not remember it? That is one piece of knowledge God has not given to human beings. What does that mean? It means that not everyone is allowed to understand the exact moment between life and death. I stare at him. This cannot be happening. It already has. I am just unable to wake up. You are not asleep. I was in bed. Yes, my wife was beside me. Yes, my daughter was in the next room. He looks back down at the book. Yes, the calmness in his voice makes me angry. You do not know them. No, you do not know anything about us. I know what is written. He turns the book slightly. I try to read the page, but the symbols change whenever I focus on them. There must be a mistake, I say. There is not. You have the wrong Roger. We do not. I am young. Younger people have died. I am healthy. Healthy people have died. I was sleeping. People die in their sleep. His answers come too easily, as though he has said the same things thousands of times. Maybe he has. I step closer to the desk. No, I need to go back. You cannot. My family needs me. They will continue. You do not understand. I understand more than you think. My daughter is only 6. The man's expression softens slightly, It almost makes me hate him more. She was sick, I continue. I told her I would see her in the morning. She is going to wake up and call for me. He says nothing. My wife will think I am sleeping. She will touch my shoulder. She will say my name. She will keep saying it because I will not answer. The images form clearly in my mind. My wife sitting up in bed, her hand shaking me, her voice becoming frightened. My daughter standing in the doorway, holding her blanket. I grip the edge of the desk, but I cannot feel the wood. I have to go back. You cannot. Send me back. That is not within my authority. Then take me to someone who can. No one here will send you back. I shake my head. This is a dream. It is not. Then do something. What would you like us to do? Beat me. The words surprise even me. The man raises one eyebrow. Beat me as hard as you can. Hurt me. Throw me down. I am sure I will wake up. We cannot do that. Why not? You are beyond physical pain. Then prove it. I do not need to prove anything. I slam both hands onto the desk. There is no sound. That frightens me more than anything else. My hands hit the wood, but there is no impact. No pain. No vibration. Nothing. I stare at my fingers. The man watches me silently. I am not going anywhere, I say. The guide beside me sighs. Roger, no, you must move. No. The people in line behind me begin to complain. Someone asks how long this will take. Another person tells me to accept what has happened. I turn on them. How can you all stand there? Some avoid my eyes. Others look at me with pity. An older woman speaks softly. We all said the same things. I am not like you. She gives me a sad smile. Yes, you are. I sit down beside the desk, or at least I try to. There is no chair, but the cloud-like ground holds me anyway. I will stay here, I say. I will stay forever. The man behind the desk picks up his pen. That has been tried. I do not care. They all move eventually. I will not. Time passes. I do not know how much. There is no sun to move across the sky. No clocks, no change in the white light. Names continue to be called. People continue to walk past. Some stop to speak to me. A young woman tells me she left behind 2 children. A man says his wife was pregnant when he died. An old man says he spent years refusing to move forward because he believed his son would need him. They all try to explain that nothing I do here will change what has happened. I refuse to listen. More people gather. They speak kindly at first, then more firmly. The man behind the desk continues working as if I am not there. Eventually, 2 guides take my arms. I try to resist, but resistance is meaningless without weight or strength. They lift me easily. I shout. I demand to be released. I call for my wife. I call my daughter's name. No one answers. The crowd parts as they carry me away from the desk. Wait. The guides stop. I twist around and look back at the seated man. When will I see them again? The question silences everyone nearby. The man looks at me for a long time. When their time comes, he says, they will be here. How long will that be? Time does not feel the same here. Will they find me? If you go where you are meant to go, will I remember them? The man hesitates. That hesitation terrifies me. What do you mean? I ask. He closes the book. Go inside. You will become intoxicated with bliss. You will have no care for anyone. I stare at him. No care? That is what happens to everyone. The guides begin pulling me away again. I stop fighting, not because I accept what he said, because I am too horrified to understand it. You will have no care for anyone. The words echo inside me. Worse than death, worse than pain. Forgetfulness dressed as happiness. What kind of heaven makes a father stop caring about his child? What kind of peace erases love? I imagine my daughter arriving here many years from now, looking through endless crowds for me. What if I do not recognize her? What if I am somewhere smiling, filled with perfect happiness, while she calls my name? What if I look at her and feel nothing? The guide takes me toward a moving staircase. It rises into a thick layer of white mist. There will be 2 doors at the top, he explains. From one, a cold breeze will blow. From the other, a warm one. I look at him. Which one do I take? The cold one. Why? That is your destination. Where does the warm door lead? He does not answer. I stop. He looks at me impatiently. Where does it lead? You were told which door to take. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you need. He gestures toward the stairs. I step onto them. They move without sound. As I rise, the crowded white space disappears beneath the mist. The voices fade. The man at the desk becomes a small shape, then vanishes completely. I am alone. The staircase continues upward. I think about what the man said. You will have no care for anyone. Maybe that is the trap. Maybe this place only looks peaceful. Maybe the people in white are not angels. Maybe the books contain lies. If this is truly death, then why does everything feel so uncertain? Why can I not remember dying? Why would anyone guide me without explaining where I am going? A thought forms in my mind. This is a dream. It must be. I repeat it silently. This is a dream, Roger. You are still in bed. Your wife is beside you. Your daughter is sleeping down the hall. You only need to wake up. But how do people wake from dreams? A loud noise, a sudden shock, a familiar voice. Fear, pain. The man said I could no longer feel pain, but perhaps he was lying. Perhaps the right door will shock me awake. Perhaps one door leads deeper into the dream while the other leads out. The staircase carries me higher. Memories begin returning in small pieces. My daughter holding my finger when she was learning to walk. My wife laughing in the kitchen with flour on her face. The 3 of us sitting on the floor on Christmas morning. My daughter asleep on my chest when she was a baby. The first time, she called me Dad. I hold on to each memory. I repeat their names. I will not forget them. I will not become blissful. I will not stop caring. The staircase finally reaches the top. 2 doors stand before me. They are tall and plain, set into a wall of white mist. The door on the left is slightly open. A cold breeze drifts through the gap. It touches me, though I still cannot truly feel it. I recognize it only as a change in the air. The cold carries a faint smell of rain and distant trees. The door on the right is also open. Warm air flows from it. The warmth reminds me of sunlight entering my bedroom in the early morning. It reminds me of waking beside my wife. It reminds me of my daughter climbing onto the bed and jumping on my legs. I stand between the doors. The guide's words return. You must go into the cold one. I look at the cold door. Beyond it, I can see only pale blue light. It is quiet. Too quiet. The warm door glows softly. From somewhere beyond it comes a sound. Very faint. A child laughing. My daughter. My whole mind freezes. I step closer. The laughter comes again. Then I hear my wife's voice. Roger? I move toward the warm doorway. Roger, wake up. My chest fills with something painful, though I should not be able to feel pain. I know that voice. I know it better than my own. Roger? I reach toward the warm light. Then I remember what the man said. There are two doors. Take the cold one. Maybe the warm door is temptation. Maybe it is designed to sound familiar. Maybe whatever waits behind it has searched my memories and chosen the voices most likely to pull me in. I step back. The laughter stops. The warm air continues flowing around me. I look at the cold door again. It is silent, peaceful. Perhaps that is heaven. Perhaps the cold breeze leads to the place where everyone becomes filled with bliss, where memories disappear, where I stop missing my wife, where I stop worrying about my daughter. I cannot accept that. I would rather suffer forever than forget them. I would rather carry the pain of losing them than enter a happiness where they mean nothing. The warm doorway brightens. I hear my daughter again. Daddy? My knees almost give way. I'm here, I whisper. Daddy, please wake up. Tears should be running down my face, but there are none. I have no tears left, perhaps no eyes capable of making them. I stand between the doors for what feels like hours. One offers silence, the other offers my family. If this is a dream, I cannot afford to choose wrongly. If I walk through the cold door, maybe I will fall deeper into sleep. Maybe I will surrender. Maybe I will become one of those peaceful figures wandering through the white mists, smiling and forgetting. The warm door feels real. It feels like home. I remember something my mother once told me when I was a child. Dreams often become frightening just before you wake. Perhaps that is what I need. Perhaps I must choose the thing they warned me against. Perhaps I must break the rules of this place. The guide told me to take the cold door. The man at the desk said I was dead. Everyone wanted me to move forward. What if they are trying to keep me asleep? What if the only way to wake is to refuse? I turn toward the warm light. The air becomes hotter as I approach. At first it is comforting, then it begins to burn. I stop. The smell changes. The warmth no longer smells like sunlight and clean sheets. It smells like smoke, something metallic, something rotten. A distant scream rises from behind the door, so faint that it could almost be mistaken for wind. I step back. My daughter's voice calls again. Daddy, it comes from the darkness beyond the light. I close my eyes. This is a dream. It has to be. I cannot leave them. I cannot allow my life to become nothing more than a memory. I had plans. I had promised my daughter that we would visit the ocean when summer came. I had promised my wife I would repair the leaking roof. We had talked about having another child. Those dreams cannot simply disappear. I will not let them. I open my eyes and stare at the two doors. The cold one waits silently. The warm one calls me by name. If there is even the smallest chance that this is a dream, I cannot follow their instructions. The rules of dreams are never logical. The safest door may be the one that keeps me asleep. The dangerous door may be the shock that wakes me. I take one step toward the warmth, then another. The heat grows stronger. Dark shapes move behind the light. Hands, hundreds of them. Reaching, my wife calls my name. My daughter begins to cry. That decides it. I run. I cross the final distance and throw myself through the warm doorway. For one beautiful second, I believe I have made the right choice. I see my bedroom. Morning light shines through the curtains. My wife is beside me, holding my face. My daughter stands near the bed. Both are crying. I'm here, I try to say. My wife looks directly through me. My daughter screams. The room changes. The curtains catch fire. The walls split open. The floor disappears. The hands I saw in the light close around my arms and legs. The warm air becomes unbearable. It enters my mouth and fills my lungs, though I no longer need to breathe. For the first time since arriving in that white place, I feel something. Pain, real pain, endless pain. The bedroom vanishes. The voices of my family twist into laughter that does not belong to them. I fall through darkness, filled with fire. As I fall, I hear the man from the desk speaking far above me. His voice is calm, almost sad. He was told which door to take. The guide answers him. They always believe the warm one leads home. The fire rises to meet me. Only then do I finally understand. The cold door was not emptiness. It was peace. The warmth was never sunlight. The voices were never my family. They were bait. I had been given a choice. I had been warned. I had been told exactly where to go. But I trusted my fear more than the truth. I thought pain would wake me. I thought love would guide me. I thought breaking the rules would return me to life. And so, with my wife's voice in my ears and my daughter's name on my lips, I marched straight through the gates of hell. Story 3. What is the hungriest you have ever been? Think about it carefully. What is the longest you have ever gone without eating? Most people I know would say, 1 day. Maybe 2. Some might remember missing dinner and breakfast, then feeling weak and angry by lunchtime. They would talk about headaches, shaking hands, or the strange emptiness that seems to twist inside the stomach. But real starvation is different. When the body goes without food for long enough, the mind often begins to fail before the muscles do. Self-control weakens. Clear thoughts become difficult. You become confused, impatient, and desperate. Eventually, the body starts consuming itself just to stay alive. Fat disappears first, then muscle. Organs begin to fail. Your thoughts break apart until the only thing left is hunger. Given enough time, you may begin looking at things you never considered food before. Leather, insects, rotten meat, your own flesh. Human beings have eaten other human beings during desperate moments throughout history. The survivors of Flight 571 did it in the Andes after their plane crashed. Members of the Donner Party did it when they were trapped by snow. People in Jamestown did it during the terrible winter of 1609. Those people ate the dead because they were trying to survive. Eating the dead and eating the living are very different things. There is a disease called kuru. It is rare, fatal, and impossible to cure. It can be caught by eating infected human brain tissue. People once called it the laughing sickness because it can cause uncontrollable laughter, trembling, spasms, confusion, and slurred speech. But kuru is not what happened here. At least, I do not think it is. I am talking about my colleagues. I know this already sounds confused. I know I am jumping from one thought to another, but I have barely slept in days. It is difficult to hold a single idea in my head for long. The heat is unbearable, and every few minutes I hear something moving outside the trailer. I need to write everything down before they return tonight. Before I decide what I am going to do. I worked at a remote space telescope monitoring station operated by a private division of the United States government. Officially, we were connected to NASA, but our department did not appear on public records. Most of the people working for the larger agency had never heard of us. The telescope itself had been launched years earlier. A chain of relay satellites followed its path. allowing it to send information back across impossible distances. The system had been built to observe a very specific section of deep space. Our job was to receive the telescope's data, study the images, and prepare reports for people whose names we were never told. The station was located in the Nevada desert, far from cities, towns, highways, and almost every sign of civilization. The government had chosen the location because radio interference was low and because no one could approach us without being noticed. We lived and worked inside a collection of air-conditioned trailers, converted shipping containers, and old mobile homes. From a distance, the station looked like a temporary construction camp that had been abandoned in the middle of nowhere. There was a kitchen trailer, an infirmary, a communications unit, a research office, a garage, and several sleeping quarters. Thick cables ran between buildings beneath metal covers. Satellite dishes stood above the compound, always pointed toward the sky. During the day, the heat turned the desert into a white, blinding wasteland. The metal walls of the trailers became hot enough to burn skin. At night, the temperature dropped, and the sky opened above us. I had never seen so many stars before working there. There were no city lights, no traffic, and no buildings for miles. When the sun went down, the universe seemed to press against the earth. Sometimes I would stand outside after my shift and feel as if I were looking down into space instead of up. We depended entirely on monthly military deliveries. Trucks brought water, frozen food, medicine, fuel, equipment, and other supplies. If a shipment was delayed, there was nowhere nearby to purchase more. We were completely isolated. People always asked me whether we had found aliens. The honest answer is that I do not know. We had photographed things that suggested intelligent activity far beyond our solar system. We found strange marks on distant moons that looked like mining scars. We found geometric structures surrounding stars, enormous shapes that some researchers believed might be parts of Dyson spheres. But those discoveries were only evidence of interference. We never photographed a creature. We never saw a ship. We never captured anything that could clearly be called alive. Not until a little over a week ago. The first incident began before sunrise. I woke to the fire alarm screaming through the compound. For several seconds, I lay in bed, confused, staring at the dark ceiling of my trailer. Then, I smelled smoke. I jumped up, pulled on my trousers, and ran outside. The eastern horizon was pale with the first light of morning. Smoke rose from the kitchen trailer, thick and black against the gray sky. Orange flames flashed behind one of the windows. Other members of the team stumbled from their sleeping quarters. Some were barefoot. Others wore only shirts and underwear. I quickly counted them. One person was missing. David was one of our senior researchers. He was in his late 50s, thin, quiet, and normally very careful. He was the kind of man who labeled food containers before placing them in the refrigerator. He never left dirty dishes in the sink and complained whenever someone forgot to turn off a light. Half of us ran to find extra fire extinguishers and water. The rest headed for the kitchen. I was the second person through the door. The heat struck me immediately. Flames rose from the stove and crawled toward the walls. Black smoke spread across the ceiling. Cupboard doors hung open. The refrigerator stood wide, releasing cold white vapor into the hot room. Food covered the floor. Packets of bread had been ripped apart. Cans lay open. Fruit had been crushed beneath bare feet. Milk, sauces, and raw eggs covered the counters. Frozen food had been pulled from the freezer and scattered everywhere. On the stovetop, a cardboard box of frozen ground beef burned over an open flame. David stood in the middle of the destruction. The sight of him stopped me in the doorway. His eyes were cloudy and unfocused. The fire reflected in them, but he did not blink. His stomach had swollen far beyond the shape of his narrow body. It pushed against his shirt like a huge, stretched balloon. The fabric had torn near the buttons, exposing pale skin covered in purple veins. With his right hand, he grabbed half-frozen, partially cooked meat from the burning box and forced it into his mouth. His fingers were being burned. He did not seem to notice. With his other hand, he held a plastic jug of milk above his face. He poured it into his open mouth while continuing to chew. Milk ran down his cheeks, mixed with blood from his gums, and spilled over his shirt. His mouth was so full that he could not close it. Raw meat dropped from his lips and landed on the floor. He bent down, picked up the pieces, and shoved them back inside. "David," someone shouted. "Step away from the stove." He ignored us. A strip of burning fat rolled across the back of his hand. His skin began to blister. That finally broke our shock. We rushed him. David fought with incredible strength. He screamed when we pulled him away from the food, but the scream did not sound like pain. It sounded like rage. 4 of us dragged him toward the door. He reached behind himself, clawing at the floor and counters. At one point, he twisted so violently that his shoulder dislocated. I heard the joint pop, but he kept fighting. He was willing to tear his own body apart just to return to the burning meat. We finally sedated him and carried him to the infirmary. His stomach looked ready to burst. He had eaten raw beef, frozen vegetables, bread, butter, eggs, spoiled leftovers, and anything else he could reach. He had even chewed through part of a cardboard package. We believed he had suffered some kind of psychotic episode. If we had understood what was truly happening, we might have killed him that morning. The second incident happened 2 nights later. I woke to someone knocking softly on my trailer door. When I opened it, Clyde was standing outside. Clyde was one of the younger researchers. He had been with us for less than a year. He was intelligent, but careless, always losing pens, forgetting passwords, and leaving his coffee in strange places. That night, he stood very close to me. Too close. The outside lights were off, and he had not brought a flashlight. I could barely see his face. "Where's the infirmary key?" he asked. His words were slow and slightly unclear. "You pinned it to the corkboard in the common room," I said. He stared at me for several seconds. "Oh," he replied. "Right." He turned and walked away. Even though I had just woken, something about him made me uneasy. He moved strangely, leaning from side to side as he walked. He had not turned on my light. He had come close enough that I could smell his breath. It smelled like blood. At first I thought he was drunk. Then I remembered David lying restrained in the infirmary. I got dressed as quickly as I could and followed him. The desert sky was full of stars. The trailers formed dark shapes around the compound, and the only sound was the low electrical hum of the equipment. When I reached the infirmary, all the windows were dark. I stopped. For a moment, I wondered whether I had dreamed the entire conversation with Clyde. Maybe he had never come to my door. Then a shadow moved behind one of the windows. My heart began to pound. I hurried to the entrance. "Clyde?" I called. "Are you in there?" The door was locked. I pressed my face near the glass and aimed my small flashlight inside. Something moved beyond the beam. Someone had entered the building and barricaded the door. I considered breaking a window, but I had nothing heavy enough. I turned and ran toward the nearest sleeping trailer. I pounded on the door. "Wake up. Something is wrong in the infirmary." I struck the metal again and again, then moved to the next trailer. By the time I turned back, people were emerging from their rooms. 4 of us reached the infirmary together. We kicked the door until the lock broke. A cabinet and desk had been pushed against it from the inside. We forced our way through the narrow opening. The overhead lights had been smashed. The smell reached us before we entered David's room. Blood has a heavy, metallic scent. It filled the hall so completely that I could taste it in the back of my throat. We raised our flashlights. Clyde and another researcher named Harry were sitting on opposite sides of David's bed. Their pupils were enormous, even with our lights shining directly into their faces. David lay between them. His stomach had been cut open from his chest to his hips. Clyde and Harry were eating him. They had opened the medical cabinets and taken scalpels and surgical scissors. They used the tools to cut pieces from David's exposed organs. David was still alive. Clyde lifted part of his intestine to David's mouth and pushed it between his lips. David chewed slowly, like an animal working on grass, but he seemed unable to swallow. His eyes stared at the ceiling. There was no recognition in them. Harry's hands moved inside the open wound. Blood covered his arms to the elbows. Both men were speaking. Their mouths were full, and their words came out wet and broken. "It hurts," Clyde said. "It hurts, and it is watching, and it hurts." Harry shook his head rapidly. "Dreadful thing," he muttered. "Mongrel, slithering, hungry, hungry, hungry. Feed him, feed him. He has to eat." I shouted at them to stop. They barely noticed us. One of the men beside me stepped forward and grabbed Harry's shoulder. The room exploded into violence. Harry swung the scissors at his face. Clyde slashed with a scalpel. We rushed them, slipping in blood and pieces of flesh. David's body rolled from the bed and hit the floor with a wet, heavy sound. One of our men lost his footing and fell beside him. Clyde seized the opportunity. He cut the man's throat. Blood sprayed across the wall. The injured researcher collapsed, clutching his neck. Clyde leaped over him, smashed through the window, and ran into the desert. 2 people followed him, but he disappeared into the darkness. We managed to overpower Harry. Several of us beat him long after he stopped resisting. Part of it was revenge for the man Clyde had killed. Part of it was fear. And part of it, though I hate admitting this, was because Harry would not stop laughing. He laughed while we struck him. He laughed with broken teeth and blood filling his mouth. Even when his breathing became a wet wheeze, the laughter continued. David died on the floor. The man Clyde attacked died minutes later. We buried both of them the following morning. The soil was hard, and the sun was already burning by the time we finished. No one said much. We were exhausted, frightened, and covered in dust. Clyde had vanished into the open desert. We believed he would die within a day from heat or dehydration. If he survived, we expected him to return for water. Harry remained our immediate problem. We handcuffed him to a metal bed in the infirmary and placed someone outside the room. On the first night, he escaped. He had chewed through his own hand, not completely, but enough to crush the flesh and break several bones. He made the hand narrow enough to pull it through the cuff. The guard found him halfway through the bathroom window. Harry attacked him and bit off part of his ear. After that, we broke Harry's legs. We told ourselves it was necessary. Maybe it was. But I remember the silence after we did it. I remember everyone avoiding one another's eyes. We were angry. These people had been our friends, and whatever was changing them was spreading through the station. Hurting Harry gave us the illusion that we still had control. He spent the next day tied to a chair. He talked constantly about the telescope. He said something was using it as a peephole. He said we had looked too far, and something had noticed us looking. He begged for food every few minutes. We fed him full meals, but nothing satisfied him. He ate until he vomited, then lowered his face and tried to eat what had come back up. When we stopped him, he bit his tongue and swallowed pieces of it. 9 healthy people remained, not including Harry. We gathered in the common room and argued about what to do. Our communication system had been destroyed. Cables were cut. Equipment had been smashed. Several important circuit boards were missing. We believed Clyde had sabotaged it while we were distracted inside the infirmary. There was no way to contact the outside world. The next supply delivery was expected at the end of the week. Alistair, one of our oldest researchers, said we had a duty to prevent Clyde and Harry from reaching civilization. He suggested that we pour all the fuel into the desert so no one could use the truck. Others argued that someone should drive for help. The nearest road was far away, but the truck might make it if we carried extra fuel and water. We finally decided to lock the fuel inside the storage unit and place an armed guard outside it at all times. Alistair did not like the decision. I could see it in his face. By then, none of us knew what had caused the madness. We did not know whether it was an infection, poison, radiation, or something else. Everyone watched everyone. No one ate alone. The kitchen was nearly empty after David's attack. We gathered the remaining emergency supplies and counted everything. There was enough food to last until the delivery, but only if we followed strict portions. That created another argument. Some wanted to stop feeding Harry. Others said he was sick and still deserved food. In the end, we voted to keep feeding him, even if it meant smaller meals for the rest of us. Alistair and I convinced the others to investigate Harry's claims about the telescope. I thought it was the best chance we had of understanding what was happening. I could not have known what we would find. Someone had erased our research. Not just the recent files. Everything. Reports, images, recordings, calculations, notes, and decrypted transmissions had been manually deleted. Years of work were gone. We had backups, but they were incomplete. The most recent images from the telescope had disappeared entirely. Those had to be the images Harry was talking about. While the others attempted to recover the files, I volunteered to question him. Harry was inside one of the trailers, wrapped in a blanket and handcuffed to a heavy chair. His broken legs were tied together. Dried blood covered the bandage around his ruined hand. I entered and locked the door behind me. He did not look up. "Don't look," he muttered. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." "What happened, Harry?" He continued staring into the corner. "What did you see?" No answer. My patience disappeared. "Harry." I struck the top of a dresser with my palm. He flinched. "What is wrong with you? What happened to David and Clyde?" Harry slowly turned his head. "The closet," he whispered. "What?" "The closet." He leaned slightly to one side and looked past me. There was a small storage closet behind my back. I turned around and pulled open the shutter-style door. What about the closet? The inside was empty. Then I noticed the chair reflected in a small metal panel on the wall. The handcuffs were hanging loose. They were covered in blood. Harry was no longer inside them. I heard the blanket fall behind me. A floorboard creaked. I tried to turn, but something struck the back of my head. The room went black. I woke while choking. Something soft and wet filled my mouth. The smell of blood was so strong that I immediately began vomiting. My face and chest were covered in it. My head hurt so badly that I could barely open my eyes. Through a narrow squint, I saw Harry kneeling in front of me. He looked weak and pale. He held a blood-soaked cloth in one hand and wiped my chin with it as if he were caring for a sick child. In his other hand, he held a piece of raw flesh. He lifted it toward my mouth. I turned my head away. "Shh," Harry whispered. "You must be starving." He pinched my nose shut. I tried to fight, but my arms would not move. My hands were tied behind the chair. My lungs began to burn. When I finally opened my mouth to breathe, Harry forced the flesh inside. I gagged. He held my jaw shut until I swallowed. By the time the others found me, Harry was dying. He had snapped a wooden handle and sharpened one end against the floor. Then he had driven it into his own stomach and torn himself open. He pulled out part of his stomach and intestines. He squeezed the contents into my mouth and fed me pieces of his own body until blood loss made him collapse. But that was not how it looked when they entered. They saw me covered in blood. They saw flesh in my mouth. They saw Harry's body open on the floor. To them, it appeared that I had killed him and begun eating him. It looked as though I had become infected too. When I woke again, I was handcuffed to a desk inside the same trailer. A lot happened while I was unconscious. The garage burned down with the truck inside. Someone destroyed the main generator, leaving only the emergency power. Several members of the team disappeared. I heard screams at different times throughout the night. From what I eventually learned, Alastor and at least 4 others had developed the same hunger. Clyde had returned from the desert. During the day, they hid from the sun inside empty trailers or beneath pieces of equipment. At night, they moved through the compound and ate anything they could catch. Rabbits, lizards, insects, each other. Alistair came to my trailer on the first evening after I woke. He knocked politely. "I know you are in there," he said. His voice sounded normal. I remained silent. "I know they locked you inside," he continued. "I can help." I crawled to the window and looked through a narrow space in the blinds. Alistair stood outside. His clothes were dirty and his lips were cracked. But he looked far more human than Harry or David had. That made him more frightening. "Let me in," he said. "We need to talk." I told him to step away from the door. He smiled. "We are not enemies. What happened to everyone? You already know." "No, I don't." "You look too." I did not see the images. "But Harry fed you." My stomach turned. Alistair placed one hand against the trailer door. "It passes through sight," he said. "But there are other ways." I told him I would let him inside if he explained everything. He agreed. He said the telescope had found something beyond the galaxies we were studying. At first, the researchers believed they were looking at a planet or a dark star. Then, the image was sharpened. It was an eye. The telescope could not capture the whole thing because it was too large. The sun itself could have disappeared inside its pupil. Alistair said the creature's body extended across distances larger than galaxies. It had no clear shape. It was a moving mass of flesh, folds, mouths, and organs without any understandable design. It had consumed worlds. Stars, civilizations, perhaps entire sections of the universe, everything it ate became part of it. It carried the memories and knowledge of every life it had swallowed. And it was still hungry. It was in constant pain because nothing could satisfy it. That hunger was the only thing it could feel clearly anymore. Alistair called the hunger a gift. He said the creature had shared it with them. All it wants, he told me, is for us to share it with everyone else. I asked how he knew these things. Had the creature spoken? Had it sent a message? Alistair's voice trembled. All you have to do is look, he said. When you see the eye, you understand. I refused to open the door. His calm behavior disappeared immediately. He struck the metal with both fists and screamed for me to let him in. Other shapes moved from behind the trailers. Clyde was with them. So were 3 people I had once eaten meals with and spoken to every day. They attacked the door together. I pushed the desk, chair, and cabinet against it. The trailers shook as they struck the walls. Eventually, the sun began to rise, and they retreated into the shadows. They have returned every night since then. Each night they come closer to breaking through. Each night I become more tired. Alistair is the most dangerous because he can still think clearly. David became almost completely unresponsive. Harry and Clyde spoke nonsense, but they still knew how to set traps, destroy equipment, and work together. Alistair can lie. He can plan. Yesterday, he pretended to be one of the military drivers bringing supplies. He copied the man's voice almost perfectly. When that failed, he used the voice of my mother. She has been dead for 6 years. The afflicted are not all equally mad. The more intelligent they remain, the more dangerous they become. I am trapped here with them, but they are also trapped here with me. The desert is too hot for them to travel during the day. The roads are too far away, and the truck is gone. I hoped I could remain inside until the supply team arrived. I thought rescue would come before my food ran out. It did not. Either the delivery has been delayed or someone changed the schedule before our communications failed. Most of the healthy team members are now dead or missing. Soon, the hungry ones will have no one else to chase. Then, all of them will focus on me. I will not be able to stop them. I have no food left. Not a crumb. The water in the bathtub has been sitting uncovered for days. Dust, insects, and blood have fallen into it. The heat inside the trailer is getting worse because the air conditioning failed yesterday. It is difficult to think. I found Harry's work laptop inside the desk and decided to write this while I could still form complete sentences. I keep thinking about the question I asked at the beginning. What is the hungriest you have ever been? My stomach has started cramping so badly that I sometimes fall to the floor. My hands shake. I smell food even when there is none. A few hours ago, I bit the inside of my cheek and tasted blood. For one horrible moment, it made me feel better. My choices are simple now. I can refuse to eat and become too weak to defend the trailer when Alistair returns. Or I can eat Harry. His body is still here. No one removed it after they locked me inside. He has been lying in the corner for days, slowly rotting in the Nevada heat. His skin has turned dark. His stomach is swollen. Flies move around his mouth and gather inside the wound he made. Every breath I take carries the smell of him. At first, the smell made me vomit. Now it is beginning to smell like meat. That is what frightens me most. I do not know whether the hunger spreading through me is natural or whether Harry infected me when he forced his flesh into my mouth. I do not know whether I am starving or becoming one of them. Last night, Alistair stopped attacking the door and spoke to me through the wall. He said he could hear my stomach. He said the gift was growing inside me. Then all of them laughed. Their laughter continued until sunrise. If anyone finds this laptop, destroy the telescope. Destroy every relay satellite if you can. Erase the research. Burn the recovered images without looking at them. Do not study the eye. Do not try to understand the creature. And for the love of God, do not look back at it. The universe is much larger than we imagined. Somewhere beyond everything we know, there is a living thing so enormous that galaxies are little more than food drifting toward its mouth. It has been starving for longer than humanity has existed. Now it knows where we are. There is movement outside. The sun is almost down. Alistair is calling my name again. He says the door does not need to open. He says hunger always finds a way inside. I have never been this hungry before. Harry has been rotting for days in this hot, sealed trailer. But that is the thing about hunger. If it becomes strong enough, it can make anything look like food. Story 4. There has only ever been one road through Bramble Mill, Old Man Perchie said. One road. Been that way since before any of us were born. This doesn't make a bit of sense. He squatted beside the fresh black asphalt, running his fingers through his gray beard while he studied it. The road looked new, but there were no tire marks, no footprints, and no signs of construction. It was perfectly smooth, dark and dry, stretching in a straight line through the middle of town. A small crowd had gathered around him in the cool light of the summer morning. The grass beside the road was wet with dew, and a thin layer of fog drifted between the houses. Most people in Bramble Mill were still asleep, unaware that the shape of their town had changed during the night. The people who had come outside were the bravest, the nosiest, or simply the ones who had nothing better to do. Old Man Perchie belonged to all three groups. His real name was Albert Perkins, though almost no one had called him Albert for decades. He had earned the name Perchie when he was a boy because he spent every spare hour fishing for perch in the river. Even now, at 78 years old, he went out with his fishing rod whenever his knees allowed it. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and slowly stood. His joints cracked as he straightened, and his bad knee sent a sharp pain through his leg. The road had appeared beside the original main street. It began somewhere beyond the northern woods, crossed the edge of town, and continued south without bending even once. It ignored fields, fences, houses, and buildings. Nothing had been removed to make room for it. The asphalt had simply passed through everything in its way. The strangest part was that no one had heard any construction during the night. There had been no trucks, machines, workers, lights, or noise. The road had not existed when the town went to sleep. Now it looked as if it had always been there. I followed it down that way. Mrs. Onbeck shouted from farther along the street. It goes straight through the corner store. The townspeople turned toward her. Mrs. Onbeck stood near the side of Normay's corner shop, waving both arms above her head. She had spent 30 years teaching young children, and her voice still had the power to silence an entire room. Even outside, it carried clearly over the muttering crowd. Perchie walked toward her, and the others followed. "Straight through?" Mrs. Grayson asked. "That's what I said, Mrs." Onbeck replied. "It goes in one wall and comes out the other." Perchie frowned. Mrs. Onbeck was known to exaggerate. She had once claimed to have seen a bear standing upright behind her garden shed, though it later turned out to be a dark coat hanging from a fence. She had also entered a chili competition and insisted her dish was homemade, even after 3 people found labels from canned chili in her kitchen bin. But this time, she was telling the truth. The new road ran directly into the side of the corner store. It did not stop at the brick wall. It continued beneath it. The bottom half of the wall had become covered in black asphalt. It looked as though the road had been poured over the building while still hot and liquid, then hardened within seconds. The road appeared again on the far side of the shop, where it continued toward the southern end of town. "That ain't possible," someone whispered. "Nothing about this is possible," Percy replied. Mr. Grayson moved toward the front entrance of the store. He was a thin man in his early 60s, with small round glasses and a badly arranged comb-over that moved whenever the wind blew. He owned a town pharmacy and liked to think of himself as a man of reason. He did not believe in ghosts, curses, signs, or anything else that could not be explained in a medical textbook. He placed one hand on the door. The moment he pushed, the bell above it jingled. The door scraped loudly against the altered floor. The lower edge had been partly trapped in the new asphalt, and Mr. Grayson had to force it open with both hands. Mrs. Onbeck squeezed past him before he could say anything. "Mr. Norme?" she called. Her voice echoed through the shop. "Mr. Norme, are you in here?" No answer came. The others entered more carefully. The inside of the shop smelled of dust, coffee, and something warm and bitter. The shelves were filled with canned food, cleaning products, newspapers, batteries, and cheap toys. Everything looked normal, except for the road. The black asphalt had climbed several inches up the walls where it passed through the building. A wide strip of the wooden floor had vanished beneath it. The legs of 2 shelves had sunk partly into the road, as though the asphalt had been soft for only a moment before becoming solid. One shelf leaned at an angle, but the products on it had not fallen. Percy stepped onto the strange surface. It felt warm beneath his boots. Not hot, exactly, but warmer than it should have been after a cool night. The road continued through the center of the shop. It rose into a small hump near the counter and then passed through the opposite wall. Mrs. Onbeck cupped her hands around her mouth. "Mrs. Normay," she called. "Where are you?" Still no answer. Mr. Grayson had moved closer to the raised section in the road. He lowered himself carefully, one hand pressed against his knee, and examined the cracked asphalt. The hump was the only uneven part of the new street. Everywhere else, the surface was straight and smooth. Here, it was broken and raised, as if something large had been trapped beneath it. "What is that?" someone asked. "Mr." Grayson did not answer. He pushed his glasses higher on his nose and leaned toward a narrow crack. For several seconds, he stared into it. Then he jumped backward so suddenly that he fell against a shelf. "I can see his shirt," he cried. The crowd went silent. "Whose shirt?" Mrs. Onbeck asked, though everyone already knew. "Mr. Norme's," Grayson said. His voice had become high and thin. "He's under there." Percy stepped closer. He bent down and looked into the crack. A small piece of blue and white cloth was visible beneath the asphalt. Mrs. Norme had worn the same striped shirt almost every day for years. Percy stood so fast that pain shot through his back. "Get tools," he ordered. "Shovels, crowbars, anything you can find." Mrs. Onbeck hurried out of the shop, shouting for help. Percy went to his garage, which was only 2 houses away. He returned carrying a heavy shovel and a short metal bar. By then, more people had gathered outside. Mr. Grayson sat against the counter, breathing too quickly. He searched through his pocket and pulled out an inhaler. Perchy ignored him. He drove the edge of the shovel beneath one of the cracked sections. The asphalt resisted. Perchy pushed harder, using his full weight. His arms shook, but he refused to stop. He had spent his whole life fighting fish on a line and lifting heavy equipment around his property. Age had weakened him, but stubbornness had taken the place of strength. With a loud crack, a section of road broke free. Perchy pulled it aside. Beneath it was a patch of pale skin. The asphalt had hardened directly against Mr. Normay's body. Several people gasped. Perchy forced the shovel beneath another piece. He worked quickly, ignoring the pain in his hands and back. Each fragment came away with a wet tearing sound. The road had attached itself to Mr. Normay's skin, and every piece removed a layer of flesh with it. Raw pink tissue appeared beneath the black surface. There was still no blood. That frightened Perchy more than anything else. Mr. Normay should have been bleeding badly, but the wounds remained dry. His skin looked peeled and damaged, yet not a single red drop appeared. Perchy and Mr. Normay had grown up together. When they were boys, Perchy had been the oldest in their small group. The younger boys had followed him everywhere. He had taught them how to swim in the river, how to bait fishing hooks, and how to climb the old water tower without being caught. Back then, Perchy had been strong and handsome. He could run for miles without becoming tired. He had believed the good years would last forever. Mr. Normay had been one of the last people left who remembered that version of him. Most of their childhood friends had died, moved away, or become too sick to leave their homes. Normay still opened his shop every morning. He still laughed at the same old stories. He still called Perchy Albert when no one else was listening. As Perchy worked his fingers beneath another piece of asphalt, it felt as though he were trying to pull his friend out of the past itself. "Help me," he shouted. No one moved. Perchy looked up. The people around him stood frozen. Staring, Mr. Grayson remained beside the counter with the inhaler in his hand. Mrs. Onbeck had returned with two younger men, but even they hesitated at the sight of what lay beneath the road. Perchy cursed under his breath. He drove the metal bar into another crack. "Don't just stand there," he growled. "He's still in there." The two younger men finally came forward. Together, they broke away more of the road. First, they uncovered Mr. Normay's shoulder, then part of his chest, then his head. The more they revealed, the worse the scene became. Mr. Normay was lying in a shallow hole beneath the road. His body had been pressed flat and twisted, as if an enormous weight had rolled over him. His arms and legs were bent in impossible directions. Bones pushed against the skin at sharp angles. One knee was folded sideways beneath his stomach. His left arm curved twice between the elbow and wrist. His skull was partly crushed. The side of his head had caved inward, but the skin had not split. His face looked flattened and stretched, like a drawing of a man who had been run over in an old cartoon. Still, there was no blood. His eyes were the most terrible part. They had swollen far beyond their normal size and pushed outward from his damaged face. The whites had turned completely red. They looked like two dark grapes ready to burst. Mrs. Onbeck covered her mouth. One of the younger men ran outside and vomited beside the store. Perchy stopped digging. "Normay?" he whispered. There was no response. He lowered one hand toward his friend's neck, though he had no idea where to search for a pulse in the twisted flesh. Before he could touch him, Mrs. Norme moved. His entire body rose at once. There was no slow movement, no sign of life returning. 1 second, he lay broken inside the hole. The next, he snapped upright like a soldier standing to attention. Everyone screamed. Mr. Norme stood in the broken road, his legs bent beneath him, his ruined eyes fixed straight ahead. His mouth opened. A shower of teeth spilled onto the asphalt. They struck the road with small clicking sounds and rolled in different directions. There was still no blood. Mr. Norme's empty mouth moved. "Albert," he whispered. His voice came from deep within his crushed throat. It sounded tight and wet, as if every word had to squeeze through broken bones. "Is that you?" Percy could not answer. No one had called him Albert in years. Hearing the name made the thing in front of him feel real. Whatever had happened to Mr. Norme, some part of his childhood friend still remained inside that ruined body. "I'm here," Percy finally said. Mr. Norme turned his head slightly. The movement produced a cracking sound. His red eyes did not focus on Percy. "I can't see you, Albert," he said. "I'm scared." Percy's throat tight. He stepped forward. "It's all right," he said, though it clearly was not. "I'm right here." A scream echoed through the shop. Mrs. Onbeck backed away, bumping into the crowd behind her. Mr. Norme lifted one foot. His leg shook violently as he placed it on the road. Then he took a step. His movements looked like those of a newborn animal trying to stand for the first time. His broken limbs dragged and swung without control. Each step produced the sound of bones grinding together. He groaned in pain. "Albert," he whispered again. Percy reached toward him. Mr. Norme stumbled into a display of potato chips. The metal stand fell with a crash. Brightly colored bags scattered across the road. The crowd separated in panic. People pressed themselves against the shelves and walls while Mr. Norme moved toward the front door. He did not look left or right. He seemed unable to see anything. Still, he followed the new road perfectly. His shoulders struck the doorframe. He continued pushing until the door opened, then shuffled outside. The townspeople followed at a distance. Mrs. Onbeck had gathered nearly every person in Bramblemill who could still walk without a cane. They stood around the store, staring as Mr. Norme moved along the black road. No one tried to stop him. No one except Percy followed. Percy looked back once. Mr. Grayson stood inside the shop, still holding his inhaler. His face was pale, and his mouth hung open. "You useless coward," Percy muttered. Mr. Grayson had not helped dig. He had not touched Mr. Norme. He had done nothing but sit there with his ridiculous comb-over and his small glasses while Percy fought to save their friend. Percy turned away in disgust. He followed Mr. Norme down the second road. The fog had grown thicker. It drifted over the asphalt in pale strips, hiding the ground around their feet. Mr. Norme moved slowly, one uneven step at a time. Sometimes he fell forward, caught himself with a bent arm, and pushed himself upright again. Other times, he dragged one leg behind him for several yards before it suddenly began moving once more. Percy stayed 10 or 15 feet behind. His bad knee burned, but he kept going. "Norme," he called. "Where are you going?" "Mr." Norme did not answer. "Stop walking." No response. "You're hurt." Mr. Norme continued down the road. The new street passed through the edge of town without changing direction. It cut through fences and gardens. It entered one side of an empty barn and came out through the other. Wherever the road crossed something, the asphalt simply covered it. A wooden fence post was trapped halfway inside the surface. Flowers had been flattened into the black road without breaking. Even the corner of a stone wall had been swallowed. Percy noticed several unusual raised shapes beneath the asphalt. One was long and narrow. Another looked almost like a hand. He did not stop to examine them. Ahead, Mr. Normay became little more than a dark shape in the fog. Percy forced himself to walk faster. His breath caught painfully in his chest. "Wait for me," he shouted. Miss Normay's silhouette did not slow. Then another figure appeared beside him. At first, Percy thought someone from town had found another path and joined them. But the second figure came from between the trees on the left side of the road. It dragged itself through the bushes and stepped onto the asphalt. Its body was twisted like Mr. Normay's. One arm hung almost to the ground. Its head leaned at a severe angle. One leg was much shorter than the other, causing it to rise and fall as it walked. Yet it matched Mr. Normay's pace. The two figures moved side by side. Percy slowed. "Who's there?" he called. Neither one answered. A third shape emerged from the trees. This one crawled at first. Its back was bent so sharply that its head nearly touched the ground. After reaching the road, it forced itself upright and joined the others. The three marched forward together. Percy's fear told him to turn around. He should have returned to Bramble Mill. He should have warned everyone to stay away from the road. He should have found a telephone and called the police, the state government, or anyone else who might understand what was happening. But something deeper inside him refused. He needed to know where the road led. He needed to know what had happened to Mr. Normay. The figures ahead disturbed him, but they also pulled at his curiosity. They seemed to be moving toward something with absolute purpose. Percy had spent his life following fishing lines into dark water, always needing to see what had taken the bait. Now the road felt like another line. Something was waiting at the other end. He had to see it. Percy walked faster. The road entered the woods. Trees stood on both sides, their branches joining above the asphalt. Morning light struggled through the leaves. The fog remained thick, making the road ahead seem to vanish into whiteness. More figures appeared. One came from behind a tree, its chest pressed flat and wide. Another crawled from beneath a fallen log. Its lower body looked crushed, and it pulled itself forward with both arms until its legs began moving. A woman in a torn nightgown stepped from the fog. Her face was missing, replaced by a smooth area of skin. Her hands stretched out in front of her as if searching for something. They all joined the road. They all faced the same direction. They moved in the same slow, painful rhythm. Percy began to hear them. Some cried softly. Some whispered names. Others repeated the same words again and again. "I can't see. Where are we going? Please help me. It hurts." "Mother? Albert?" Percy looked toward Mr. Normay, but he could no longer tell which figure was his friend. There were too many of them. The road ahead had filled with bodies. They walked shoulder to shoulder, their broken limbs rubbing against one another. Some were thin, some were large. Some wore modern clothes, while others wore clothing from much earlier times. Percy saw a man dressed in an old military uniform. Beside him walked a woman wearing a long dress covered in mud. A child moved between them with both arms bent backward. The road had gathered people from different places and different years. All had been flattened, crushed, twisted, or changed. All continued walking. Percy's fear grew stronger. He wanted to turn around, but the road behind him no longer looked empty. More figures had appeared there as well. They were walking toward him. The parade filled the road in both directions. Percy stood trapped in the middle. Normay, he shouted. Several heads turned toward the sound. Their eyes were damaged, missing or swollen red. None of them could see him. They reached out with broken hands. Percy stepped away and felt his boots stick to the asphalt. He looked down. The road beneath him had softened. The black surface moved like thick tar around his shoe. He pulled his leg, but the road held tightly. Pain shot through his knee. Percy lost his balance and fell forward. His hands struck the asphalt. The road rose around his fingers. It was warm, not warm from the sun. Warm like skin. Percy screamed and tried to push himself up. The asphalt softened beneath his body and pulled him downward. It climbed over his palms, wrists, and knees. The marching figures did not stop. Feet stepped around him. Some stepped on him. A twisted leg pressed against his back. A bare foot landed on his hand. The weight should have broken his fingers, but instead his hand simply flattened against the road. There was no blood. Percy felt his bones bend. His fingers spread beneath the skin like soft wires. The road tightened around his chest. He tried to shout, but the asphalt pressed against his ribs and forced the air from his lungs. A heavy pressure rolled over his legs. His knees crushed flat. His hips twisted sideways. Percy felt every bone break, though none of them pierced his skin. He thought of Mr. Normay trapped beneath the road in the corner store. Now he understood. The road had not simply covered him. It had changed him. Percy's face struck the asphalt. His glasses broke beneath his cheek. Something pressed against the back of his skull. The world became dark. For a moment, he felt himself being spread thin, as if his whole body were being pushed into the road. Then, the pressure stopped. Percy opened his eyes. He was standing. He did not remember getting up. His body felt wrong. One leg bent in two places. His left arm hung twisted against his side. His neck had been forced forward, so he could see only the road beneath him. His vision was dark and red. He could make out shapes, but no details. Normay, he tried to say. Several teeth fell from his mouth. There was no blood. Percy lifted one foot. His body moved without his permission. He stepped forward. Then he stepped again. He joined the parade. No one in Bramble Mill saw Old Man Percy return. By noon, the road had become empty again near the corner store. The fog lifted. The sun rose high over the town. The people searched for Percy and Mr. Normay, but they found only the black road stretching south toward the woods. Some wanted to follow it. Mr. Grayson convinced them not to. They placed chairs, ropes, and warning signs across the road. By the next morning, all of them had been swallowed into the asphalt. The second road remained. People from outside Bramble Mill came to study it. Police officers arrived first, then engineers, scientists, journalists, and government workers. They followed the road in both directions. They never found where it began. They never found where it ended. Maps showed that it continued through forests, mountains, rivers, towns, and cities. It crossed borders without stopping. It passed beneath oceans and emerged on distant shores. Nothing could destroy it. Drills broke. Explosives failed. Machines placed on the road vanished beneath the surface. Sometimes, people did too. Years later, pieces of clothing were still found beside it. Old boots, children's shoes, torn uniforms, fishing hats. Those who stayed near the road at night sometimes heard footsteps. They described a crowd moving through the darkness, though no one could see anyone there. Others heard voices beneath the asphalt. Some called for their mothers. Some begged for help. One voice repeatedly asked for a man named Albert. Another answered from farther down the road. In many ways, Old Man Perchy joined the parade the moment he decided to follow his friend into the fog. The road had caught his curiosity before it caught his body. For miles, the tangled mass of flesh and bone continued walking beneath the burning afternoon sun. Broken feet dragged across the asphalt. Twisted arms swung at their sides. Crushed mouths whispered names no one remembered. None of them knew where they were going. None of them could stop. They marched until their bodies finally collapsed into the road, where they remained for a while as dark, uneven shapes beneath the surface. Then the asphalt slowly became smooth again. The parade never reached its destination. There was no destination to reach. The road that circles the world has no beginning, and it has no dead ends. Story 5. It was supposed to be a perfectly normal family outing. My mother, my father, my sister, my baby brother, and me. Nothing about that evening should have stayed in my memory for the rest of my life. It should have become one of those old family stories we laughed about years later. We should have remembered the expensive food, the fancy building, or how uncomfortable Claire looked in her dress. Instead, I remember the empty chair. I remember the wine disappearing from the glass beside it. Most of all, I remember the hand beneath the table. We were a middle-class family living in South Manchester during the 1990s. Our house stood in the Heatons, in one of those quiet suburban streets where most of the homes looked almost the same. They had small front gardens, brick walls, and narrow driveways that were barely wide enough for one car. I lived there with my parents, my younger sister Claire, and my baby brother Troy. Our lives followed the same pattern most weeks. Mom woke Claire and me for school. We ate breakfast in the kitchen, usually toast or cereal, while Dad read the newspaper before leaving for work. Then Claire and I walked to school together, arguing about something small along the way. After school, we came home, finished our homework, watched television, and waited for dinner. Our family rarely went anywhere special. Sometimes, on weekends, we visited a shopping center or went to the piers. We would eat fried fish, chips, burgers, or whatever cheap food Dad could convince Mom to buy. Most of the time, however, Mom would look at the prices and announce that she could make something better at home. Claire and I always complained. We did not appreciate home-cooked meals then. Children rarely appreciate normal things until they are gone. One cold evening in February, Dad came home from work wearing the widest smile I had ever seen on his face. He rushed into the kitchen, where Mom was cooking. Troy sat in his high chair beside her, chewing on a colored wooden block that was far too large for his mouth. We won, Dad shouted. Mom turned away from the stove. What? We won the free dinner. He pulled a white envelope from inside his jacket and pushed it into her hands. Mom stared at it. Oh my God, how is that possible? Dad laughed and shrugged. I don't know. I filled in one of those competition forms at work a few months ago. I forgot all about it. He leaned against the kitchen counter while Mom tore open the envelope. I called the number earlier, he continued. They asked me all sorts of questions about the family. food preferences, allergies, health conditions. Health conditions? Mum asked. They said it was because of the menu. They wanted to make sure nobody would have a reaction. And you told them? I said none of us were allergic to anything. Mum's eyes moved across the letter. This is incredible. Orago's is supposed to be one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manchester. She smiled excitedly. The women at the Revlon counter are always talking about it. Meredith said people wait months for a table. At the time, I was sitting at the dining table with my school book spread in front of me. I tried to focus on my homework, but I could not stop listening. A restaurant where people waited months to eat sounded important. Mum continued reading. Her smile weakened for a moment. Oh, the dinner is not until April. Dad looked disappointed. That long? It says the date cannot be changed. Mum looked up and smiled again. Well, it will give us something to look forward to. Then she folded the letter and placed it in a kitchen drawer. Within a few days, I had forgotten about it completely. April arrived quietly. One afternoon, I came home from school covered in grass stains and mud after playing football with my friends. Mum was waiting in the hallway. Her expression changed the moment she saw me. Alan, look at your clothes. We were playing football. You knew we were going out tonight. I had not remembered. Mum pointed towards the stairs. Bath. Now. I began to complain, but she raised her voice. Alan, get into the bath now. Your clothes are on the bed. Her words followed me all the way upstairs. The outfit waiting in my room looked new, though it might simply have been something I had avoided wearing. It included a white shirt, dark trousers, a knitted vest, and a coat. I hated the vest. Even then, I did not like wearing extra layers of clothing, especially when they made me look like a child in an old family photograph. The house quickly became chaotic. Mum moved from room to room, checking everyone's clothes and hair. Dad could not find his tie. Claire complained about her dress. Troy cried while Mum tried to place him in a tiny suit. Time seemed to move faster whenever our family was in a rush. Before I knew it, we were sitting in Dad's car on the way into the city. Spinning fields looked completely different in the evening. We had driven through the area before, but only while traveling somewhere else. That night, the tall buildings and glass towers seemed almost magical. Lights reflected from windows high above the streets, and well-dressed people moved between restaurants and offices. I pressed my face against the car window. You had better be on your best behavior, Mum warned us from the front seat. Claire sank lower in her seat. She wore a frilly emerald dress that she clearly hated. Tell that to Alan. I only fight back when you started, I said. You always started. Do not begin, Mum snapped. Claire folded her arms and looked away. Troy sat happily in his car seat, wearing the smallest suit I had ever seen. He kicked his feet and made quiet sounds to himself, unaware that everyone else was tense. Dad turned into a wide entrance surrounded by plants and small lights. The driveway looked more like the entrance to a private garden than a restaurant. Several men in dark blue velvet uniforms stood near a golden revolving door. Behind them, tall windows stretched up the side of the building. One of the men opened Dad's door. Dad handed him the car keys and received a small ticket in return. Another employee led us through the entrance and towards a lift. Claire and I stared at everything. The lift opened onto a wide hallway with polished floors and soft golden lighting. At the end stood the entrance to Arago's. A huge aquarium had been built into one wall. Silver fish moved through blue water while small lights shone from beneath the rocks. On the wall beside it, the restaurant's name glowed in gold letters. Oragos. A man in a black suit stood behind a narrow desk. Dad gave him the invitation. The man read it carefully, then looked at each member of our family. His eyes rested on Troye for slightly longer than the others. 5 guests, he said. Dad nodded. Yes, 2 adults, 2 children, and a baby. The man smiled. Of course. A waitress appeared and asked us to follow her. The inside of the restaurant felt like another world. Claire was just as amazed as I was. We were used to restaurants with bright red and yellow walls, plastic tables, and bottles of ketchup beside paper napkins. Oragos was dark and quiet. Small lamps stood on every table. Thick curtains divided different sections of the room. The air smelled of spices, flowers, and something sweet that I could not recognize. The waitress led us towards a private area at the back. A Japanese-style screen separated our table from the others. The table was round and covered with a white cloth made from several layers of fabric. The edges hung in soft folds almost to the floor. 5 chairs surrounded it. There was also a high chair for Troye. I immediately ran towards the chair beside the window. From there, I could see most of Manchester beneath us. Buildings, roads, and moving cars looked tiny from so high above the city. Claire frowned. I wanted that seat. First come, first served, I said. She knew the rule. Mum sat beside Dad. Claire sat beside me. Troye's high chair stood beside Mum. One seat remained empty between Dad and me. Please make yourselves comfortable, the waitress said. I will return with refreshments and your food cards. She left. Mum waited until she was completely gone before pulling a small digital camera from her handbag. Meredith is going to be furious when she sees these. She began taking pictures of everything. The aquarium. The table. The view. Dad pretending not to notice her. Claire hiding her face, Troy chewing on the sleeve of his suit. Dad looked slowly around the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he whispered. Mum lowered the camera. What are you counting? There are 5 chairs. Yes, Mum said. There are 5 of us. Dad shook his head. No, there are 5 normal chairs and a high chair. That makes 6 places. Mum looked around. Well, perhaps the table is designed for 5 adults. I told them we needed a high chair instead of one of the seats. It doesn't matter, Richard. Dad looked at the empty chair again. Then he shrugged. The waitress returned a few minutes later, pushing a cart covered with bottles, glasses, and menus. She asked Claire and me what we wanted to drink. I chose Coke. Claire asked for sparkling apple juice. The waitress gave Troy a small plastic cup filled with orange juice. Then she turned to Mum and Dad. Would you prefer the red or the white wine? We'll have the red, Dad said. Mum nodded. The waitress began speaking about the wine. She mentioned the year, the vineyard, and other details that meant nothing to me. When she removed the cork, it made a loud popping sound. Claire jumped. That's scary, she said. I don't think I like wine. Dad smiled, more for me. The waitress filled Mum's glass first, then Dad's. Then she moved towards the empty seat. She poured wine into the third glass. My parents stopped moving. Mum had just lifted her own glass towards her lips. Excuse me, she said. The waitress looked at her. Mum laughed nervously. Who is that one for? The waitress glanced at the empty chair. Your guest, of course. Her polite smile did not change. Then she pushed the cart away. Mom and Dad looked at the extra glass. "I'll drink it," Mom said after a moment. She reached towards it. Dad touched her wrist. "No, just leave it. It was probably a mistake." "Then leave it." Claire was too busy reading the menu to notice their concern. Troy sucked happily from his bottle. I looked down. The waitress had given him a plastic cup, not a bottle. The empty cup was rolling slowly beneath the table. I grabbed Claire's arm. She pushed my hand away. "What? Did you pour his juice into the bottle? What are you talking about?" She looked towards Troy. His baby bottle was filled with orange juice. The plastic cup lay on its side beneath the table. Mom noticed it at the same moment. "What did you two do?" "It wasn't me," Claire and I said together. Mom lifted the bottle from Troy's hands. "Who put this in here?" Troy immediately began to cry. "Why would you do that?" Mom demanded. "We didn't." The table became noisy. Mom scolded us. Troy screamed. Claire insisted she had not touched the bottle. Dad drank from Mom's wine. For a few moments, we forgot we were sitting in an expensive restaurant. "Enough," Mom snapped. Claire and I fell silent. Mom lifted Troy from the high chair and carried him around the table. She whispered to him, begging him to stop crying before someone asked us to leave. Other diners had begun to stare.